Hello and welcome to another chess video. I am Master Jónsson from Iceland. And I want to look at a game from the Gibraltar Masters, the last round, 10th round. We had a look at a game from every round of Tara Steel, and I didn't really put the same effort into the Gibraltar Masters. I kind of watched it with one eye, as we say in Icelandic. But here we have the last round game, which potentially could decide the tournament. Before the round, Vladislav Artemiev was leading with 7.5 out of 9. And Yangyi was among players with 7 points. And if he were to win this game, he would either win the tournament outright or get into a tiebreak. So, Yangyi was the 4th seed before the tournament, rated 27.64. Artemiev was number 11, rated 27.09. And this tournament, of course, had MBL, Aronian, and Nakamura. Some very strong super grandmasters. So a very good tournament for these guys who, had the chance to win the tournament. But let's see what happened in the game. Yangyi had the white pieces, and he opened with e4, and we have the Caro-Kann. More usual for Artemiev, I believe, is to play c5, the Sicilian, but we have the Caro-Kann and the advanced variation. I'm feeling a little bit under the weather, as you can maybe hear from my voice, but we'll just, fight through it. So bishop f5. We recently had a game with c5, one of Anand's games with a3 and then b4 plans. Very nice game. But in this one we go for the short variation, knight to f3, e6, bishop e2. So white just gets castled quickly, and his options include either playing solidly with c3 or in some cases even playing aggressively with pawn c4. Black retreats the bishop to g6, and here we have the former option by Yangyi. He plays solidly c3 and knight to h6. So just like in the French, the knight is usually headed for this nice square here on f5. Could have gone via e7 as well, but then you're blocking the bishop. So even though white can take on h6, black prefers this square to get to f5. So white can take, but it didn't. He played a4. We had a5, theoretical nullity. Knight to a3. And we still have some moves here. Bishop e7. Knight c2, castles, knight c to e1, a very extravagant regrouping of the knight. It goes from a3 to c2 to e1. And now finally after c5, he takes on h6. He probably didn't want to put the knight on d2 because it doesn't really have a lot of squares. He would have to move the rook and then put it maybe on f1. But maybe that doesn't fit white's plans in these lines, so he went with the other rerouting. And now he finally takes. And okay, this looks bad, but this is sort of like a give and take situation. Black gets the bishop here, and potentially an unopposed black squared bishop, which can make a difference. But of course he damages its structure, and white will try to play for that. Maybe get some squares for his knight, and or attack the king if the opportunity arises. First we have bishop to b5 here. So Yangyi is sort of blocking the queen side. It's almost impossible for black to kick this bishop away. So everything's blocked here. So Artemiev decides to take on d4 to try to open something on the queen side, and maybe has some chances to do something on the c file. First, he does as white. He reroutes his knight. This knight doesn't have a lot of prospects. If we were to go to b6, white can simply play at some stage, maybe b3, and the knight doesn't have any squares. So black instead prefers knight to b8. He wants to put the knight on the c6 square. Queen d2, attacking the pawn, and of course black defends it. And now knight d3. And we see this fancy regrouping to d3. The knight has good prospects. It can go to c5, or it can support kingside actions from f4. Knight a6 by Artemiev, knight to f4 by white. The queen goes to b6 and h4. It looks dangerous to allow h5, but black always has bishop to e4, so he's not worried about an h5 push just yet. So now I play rook after c8, challenging the c file. White wants his fair share of the c file as well, and we have a trade. Now black can't put anything on the c file. So he goes about trying to fix that problem. He plays knight to b4. We have g3 and knight to a2. And from here we are actually covering more or less all the squares. So the rook has to move from the c file. Rook to d1, and now black heads to the c file. Rook to c8. White could have played rook a1, but if we go back, hitting the knight, but oops. But then probably knight just goes back and will threaten rook c8 anyway. And if white wanted to draw, we could draw here. But seems like Yangyi wanted more, and he played rook to d1. Rook c8, knight h2. So maybe some ideas of putting an knight on g4 and eyeing the h6 square. Queen to c7. And bishop to d3. It didn't want black penetrating here with the queen just yet, so bishop to d3. And black can sort of never move this guy. If we take, we see that we've created a lot of problems on the king side, and the king gets too exposed. So the bishop has to stay on g6, an important defensive piece. So black plays h5. And white was maybe threatening to play h5 himself now and trade off these bishops. So h5 by black, and now white tries to break through, plays g4, and now knight b4, forcing the trade, and g takes h5. So white has won a pawn here, but this pawn is hanging, and black is now ready to use the c file, which he does. Plays queen to c2. We have hg and queen to f5. Now if we were to take on f7, which didn't happen, black can take on h4, then maybe we recoup the pawn, and you have to worry about your king all of a sudden. A lot of threats appear on the board. Bishop g5 is also a threat when the knight lacks support. So Yangyi prefers queen e3 here. F takes g6 and queen to g3. But now black is sort of starting to take over. Rook to f8. Now we're hitting this guy, and he has to go to a passive square. Knight to g2, queen to c2, hitting the rook, but the knight covers the rook and hits the queen. Queen comes back to e4. Knight e to g4, keeping control over the f3 square. Otherwise, maybe black could think about putting something there. Knight g6. So black, despite being down a pawn, is starting to create threats. Now the d4 pawn is under attack. White defends it, but now the rook comes in, rook to f4. And it's actually very difficult to protect this guy. And Yangyi decides to give it up here on f6, or give up a pawn, give one pawn back here, and then take on e4. After knight f3, we have equal pawns, but the difference is that white's pawns are much too weak here. And another nice knight regrouping, knight to e7, followed by the knight to f5. So now an excellently placed knight, hitting both pawns. And white is struggling here to hold on. After rook to d3, Artemiev won a pawn on h4, so now all of a sudden he's up a pawn. But it is a rook ending, and they do have a drawing tendency. However, white's problem is that his rook is very passive. If you try to activate it, you're simply losing another pawn. And now you're down 2 pawns, and that's too much. So you have to stay passive. King g3, g5 protecting the rook and keeping pressure on d4. King g2, the rook swings over. King to g2, pawn comes to g4. King to f1. And here, your white doesn't really have much of a choice here. Plays king to g2, rook e1, and now b3. So very passive rook, but it is doing a good job. It is protecting this pawn and this pawn. but it does have the danger of becoming overloaded. And here Artemiev has a nice finishing touch. He sort of triangulates and forces white to lose a move here. First he plays king to e4, attacking the rook. The rook goes to d2, has to keep an eye on the pawn on d4. Rook b1, attacking the pawn. So white has the counterattack, hitting this one, but now the king comes back. Rook to d3, and now rook h1. So we basically had more or less the same position, except that the rook is on b1 instead of e1. Doesn't really matter. It's on the first rank. It wants to come to h1, and we moved the white king from g2, the good square, to g3. So that was the excuse me, the aim of the triangulation, and now the rook gets to h1, and the deadly threat is rook to h3, winning the rook. So king g2, but rook h3 nonetheless, and the Chinese grandmaster resigned, and we have a new Vlad. Move over, big Vlad, little Vlad is in town. So a great performance by Vladislav Artemiev, just a few days after big Vlad, Vladimir Kramnik, resigned. So maybe we have a little bit of passing of the torch in Russian chess. In general, it seems like it. Svidler and Grishik probably will. I mean, they'll continue playing, but it seems like they were omitted from the last Olympia team, and Kramnik has retired. So new guys like Artemiev, even though he's been around for a while, and Artemiev and such players might be taken over now in Russian chess. But okay, the reason, of course, for resigning is, well, if you move the rook, you're going to lose a pawn. And actually, you're going to lose another pawn because I will attack 2 pawns from b4. And if you take on h3, this does even out the pawns, but only temporarily, because king e4, and I take the pawn. And this d pawn will queen quite easily. If you go from counterplay or whatever you do, you can see that this is only 1, 2, 3, 4 moves. Meanwhile, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So white queens way faster and wins the game. So yeah, Vladislav Artemiev, winner of the Gibraltar Masters. Let's have a look at his performance. He had a great tournament. You can see his starting rank was number 11. The top 3, of course, Aronian, MVL, I think Nakamura rather than Yangyi. Yangyi was number 4, so exceptionally strong tournament where we have the 11th seed over 2700. And you see his performance rating, ridiculous, 2,941. That's yeah, the rating he performed at, and he's going to gain 27.4 points there. So he's going to 2736, which will yeah, push him up the list tremendously. And let's have a look at the result. He's winning against lower rated players in the first few rounds. He draws against Argentinian Grandmaster in the 3rd round, wins against an Indian Grandmaster and Grandmaster from Kazakhstan. Then a draw against MVL, beats Nakamura, draw against Aronian with the black pieces, and then great finish, beating Navarra and Yangyi. So yeah, tremendous performance, and yeah, worthy winner. So congratulations to small Vlad or little Vlad, and thank you for watching this video. I'll see you in the next one. As always, if you haven't, subscribe button, another video up there. I'll see you later. Bye bye.